Welcome. As you joining us, you'll be placed in silence mode. However, please get familiar with the tool. You have the Q&A session. That's where we encourage you to post your questions. If you like to make your questions public, you can also leverage the social media tools, Twitter, LinkedIn, leveraging the hashtag you see on the screen, ABBPGW, that's ABB Power, Gas, and Water. We'll get started shortly. All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to today's virtual conference, Critical Digital Solution to Support Sustainable Energy Transition, brought to you by IoT World and sponsored by ABB. I'm Lucian Fogoros, I'm the co-founder of IoT World, and on behalf of the sponsor, ABB and IoT World, thank you for joining. We have over 700 people registered for the event from over 90 countries, so we'd like to say thank you for spending the time with us. A large part of this session is the opportunity to engage with the speaker live, so to support that, we're giving away a membership, 1-year-long membership to our VIP community, vip.iot-world.com. Simply post your relevant questions for our speakers in the Q&A session. I'd like to introduce our moderator for today's session, Kevin O'Donovan, technical evangelist, a friend, an advisor, and I could not think of a better person to moderate this discussion among these prominent speakers on energy transition. Kevin, welcome.
Thank you, Lucien, and good afternoon from the south of France. Good morning to everybody in the US. No, I'm delighted to be here. I spend my time looking at new technologies right across the energy industry, and I've got a sneak preview of some of the things we'll be talking about here, so I'm certainly looking forward to this discussion. I'm delighted to be joined this morning by Brandon Spencer, the Division President for ABB Energy Industries. Good morning, Brandon.
Hey, good morning. Fantastic to be here. Good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone joining in. Appreciate you guys investing a few minutes with us today.
And with Gino Hernandez, the head of global digital business at ABB Energy Industries. Gino, good morning.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Pleasure to be here as well. Thank you.
So I suppose it's fair to say that the last couple of years have been pretty interesting, and interesting is probably one word. And what I mean by that is, if you look at, in the world I live in new technology and innovation, the pace of change of innovation coming at the energy industry has been, it's been hard to keep up with, to be quite honest. You then throw in the whole energy transition and the pace at which that's accelerating. And given recent announcements, we've got COP26 around the corner, and that's only going to continue to accelerate, and which is great. And I suppose then you throw in that we had a global pandemic for 12 months. You couldn't make this up. And yet, as critical industries go, the energy stayed flowing and the lights stayed on. So I suppose we're here today and we're looking at critical digital solutions to support a sustainable energy transition. And I suppose digital solutions and critical infrastructure and sustainable and energy transition mean many things to many people. So if I may, Brandon, at ABB, how do you guys define critical digital solutions?
Yeah, thank you. And so just some color for those attending. The business that I have the fortune of serving is what we call energy industries. And so that's our power generation, water, wastewater, oil and gas, chem and refining, life sciences with pharmaceuticals, so all these diverse industries. And so all of those, when we talk today, we're kind of talking across that landscape of vertical markets. And so we may get into some specific solutions that, hey, in an offshore facility, this is what we're doing versus a conventional power facility or whatever it is. But I just wanted to give some context to the listeners of what does energy industries mean, because ABB is a big animal, certainly, and so we know we could confuse the listeners. When we talk about critical digital solutions, I think it starts with the things, anything that's around process, anything that's around safety, anything that's around the power distribution or the energy sourcing for the facility. So all of these are critical applications. And then I would say from there, we move into the systems that are interfacing between IT and OT. And so those are kind of the four buckets or topics that I would put things in. So making sure that the process is running efficiently, that we have transparency in what's going on, the safety systems are all performing the way that they're supposed to be, the right redundancies, and protecting people, assets, equipment, all these elements. Power distribution. At ABB, we go from pretty much the incoming line through the smallest consumer and everything in between. And so certainly, nothing happens without the power side of things. And the way I explain it to my kids, and I'm not insinuating that anyone on the phone wouldn't understand it in a more complicated way, but the way I always explain it to my kids is hearts, brains, and veins of the industrial facilities. And that's really what ABB does. The brains is the automation, and certainly the control, instrumentation, all these sort of things. The veins is the power distribution, and then the heart is the primary mover. So the generators, pumps, all of these things that we do. So, when we talk critical digital infrastructure, it's solutions, services, products that surround those four elements that I talked about.
Okay, and I have to admit I hadn't heard the hearts, brains, and veins one. That's a good one. I've written that down. Now, Gino, when we talk about the digital solutions, and as Brandon said, it's you guys cover so many different industries and whatever, but I suppose there's some core things. But when we talk about the solutions and how they help a sustainable energy transition, how do you map that up? Is that like energy efficiency or and or what?
Sure, it's quite a few things. Here, just to give some background, here at ABB, I'm responsible for the digital business for Brandon. So I have from responsibility from the sales end, the R&D input, M&A activities. All of those activities I'm responsible for Brandon. And as we look at sustainability and what that means for our customers, it's really around carbon footprint reduction at the end of the day. And as we look at that, and I think about the areas where we're helping customers, it seems like there's really two areas where customers are reaching out for help. One is energy efficiency. Is how do I reduce the amount of energy that I'm taking in? And then the other area is really around the process side. And as you look at a unit of energy, for that same unit of energy, how do I get additional process or additional output from that energy? Those are the two predominant areas where customers today, as they begin to talk about sustainability, because they want to drive value for their shareholders, those are the two areas that customers continually reach out to drive that value for the business and for the shareholder as well.
And
Okay,
Kevin, maybe
you.
one thing, if I can add, the energy efficiency topic. This has been a topic that's been around for quite some time, but my boss was in an interview a few times, and I've heard this in other places, that the greenest energy is the energy you don't consume.
Yeah.
And so, I don't think that we should lose sight of this, that while we're going to talk about technology today, new offerings and different things, there is low-hanging fruit out there to make things more greener, more efficient, more sustainable today. Not all of this is placing humongous bets on technology tomorrow. There is things that we can do today. So I want to make sure we also have kind of the practical side of the equation as well.
No, that's a great point, Brandon, because we sometimes get carried away that, we need all this new capacity and we need all this new, whether it's decentralized this or centralized that, and hydrogen and fusion and whatever. And as long as I've been in the IT industry and in the energy industry, the whole concept of the amount we could save by just being more efficient and not building out stuff and but sometimes energy efficiency isn't seen as the sexy cool thing. That said, the guys who pay the bills are ultimately, and in today's world, people are looking at, well, how can we become more efficient? So energy efficiency is a key piece. And if I look at a lot of the stuff rolling up in the US, here in the EU with the EU Green Deal, energy efficiency is a key piece of that puzzle and has to be, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Critical element.
Now, excuse me, the other thing, I suppose, when we talk about digital, we've been talking about digital transformation for years, but because of the past 12 months, we've seen a lot of, some people would say we've seen more digitalization, especially in the oil and gas, the utility industry in the last, 12 months than we saw in 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
Brandon, is that something that you see as like a once-off because it was kind of like we had to do it, or is this just going to continue?
Yeah, no, I don't think it's a once-off. I don't think we can afford for it to be a once-off. I think our industries have been innovative around technology, and there's lots of different examples. I mean, we've got subsea examples that we're doing together with partners where technology and the deployment of it is nothing short of spectacular of how the innovation has happened. Or competitiveness, if you look at onshore shale gas, for example, the competitiveness levels that technology has allowed that to get to in order to be profitable. So I think we've been innovative around technology. The digital side has certainly always been this battle between the IT side of organizations and the operational side of organizations. And hey, what about cybersecurity? What happens if we're responsible for this scope of work, not you, et cetera? And so I don't think it's a once-off. I think it's a sustained path forward because there is efficiencies to be gained. There's easy examples to cherry pick, like what we do virtually now with our teams instead of traveling, customer engagements virtual instead of traveling, FATs that we now do, our factory acceptance tests. We do a tremendous amount of these now remote instead of mobilizing people from all over the world to different places to just check if something's being done right. I mean, so we should never go back to the old way of doing things. We should never have people on airplanes to go to an FAT for something that we can do virtual using virtual reality, all these sort of things, which is what we're doing now and what we're implementing. So I think some of those things are natural things that should stay. I would also say that the barriers to adoption have come down. And so, we used to joke, I used to joke a lot. I've been in oil and gas for the last 15 years, essentially in power gen for 6 years before that. And we used to joke with the customers at time about being aggressive followers of technology, right? Maybe not necessarily a leader. And if you look at kind of the IT adoption curve, you see banking and finance and different things that are higher on a curve than maybe where we are now. But we're certainly moving up that curve as an industry. And I think the barriers to adoption have come down some, and that allows speed to happen, and then innovation can be injected. So it's no longer, not everything has to be proven in use for 2 years or 3 years in the field operating. It's, hey, let's understand this, let's pilot it, if it works, let's go. And so I think kind of this agile execution and agile methodology, we're seeing that really have an impact with our customers where speed matters.
No, I agreed. And in my previous career, I was one of the guys running around trying to sell people the latest and greatest new technology. And certain people, I'd go back to them year after year, and they're saying, "Oh, you're back again. We haven't figured out how to use what you sold us last year. So now we have another gadget. So great."
Yeah, and I think that's a really relevant point. And part of the reason I think that we didn't adopt it faster is there's lots of studies out there that say maybe we use 20 or 30% of the data that we collect. So an industrial facility, we can drown users in data, and we can drown operators in data and alarms and all these sort of things. But what do we do with it? How do you make it actionable? How do you make it intelligent? How do you make it autocorrect or auto configure or diagnose these sort of things? Well, now we're getting to a place where we start using more of that data. So then all of a sudden there's a value that comes along with the use. And so I think that as we can use more of that data, translate it into a tangible business value, you'll see it even multiply in terms of the adoption.
No, I agreed. And just before I come back to that, I saw Greg Dearwater had asked, are we recording this? Yes, Greg, we are. So this will be available offline afterwards as well. I see the questions flying in. Folks, keep asking your questions. As Lucian had called out at the start, there's actually a draw afterwards. So somebody will win a free subscription to the whole IoT world community. So I'll keep the questions coming in, and I'm following them here. We'll come back to them. And just to build on Brandon's point there, the other thing was, if I had a dollar from every time someone in oil and gas or utilities told me, Kev, we're never going to the cloud, I'd be a rich man. And then I saw last year where Brandon, you mentioned it in terms of we need to do a commissioning, we need to do break fix, we need to do something, and we can't fly the engineer, he or she, somewhere because whatever, the world changed. Or the best line I heard last year was they said the smartest person in the room is the only person in the room. And you had to train them. So Gino, I suppose that And yet someone like me is like, ooh, toy gadgets, and oh, isn't this great? Look at the technology and you can do all this. How do you then translate that into the world we're in today, where ESG is becoming far more prevalent? I need to be sustainable, but it has to make business sense.
Yes. Absolutely, absolutely. And we talk about business sense and we look about sustainability. There's really four areas that customers are really driving us towards. I mean, one is around operations, around operational efficiencies. The other one would be around maintenance and looking at maintenance and trying to figure out what the right maintenance schedules are. Looking at, to Brandon's point around looking at the data, but looking at the data in an intelligent way that's enabling them to determine when exactly they do need to do that critical maintenance versus on a regular schedule that's always been there for the last 20 years. Energy efficiency we've already talked about, but that's the other big category I would say was category number 3 for us. And then the really the fourth category is around HSSE, and it's really around Brandon touched on this a little bit earlier. It's around cybersecurity. As you begin to make all of these moves and you begin to adopt cloud technologies, you've got to do it in a safe way that protects all of your systems. And if we look even at our cyber business here at ABB, it's been our fastest growing business in the digital space. So customers are very interested in not only taking advantage of these new technologies, but doing it in a way that makes it sustainable for their business from a security perspective as well. So yeah, these are those kind of the areas that we see a lot of customers driving towards as they look to not only make enhancements for the business, but add value to the business as well.
One thing that we touched on, Kevin, it's a term that we've used before that's gotten some attention, is just the Orphan software comment that we use in ABB. And so, with our Genix offering and some of the offerings that we have, our cybersecurity offering, what we're trying to do is make the connection between these disparate systems tighter. Because what happens is a customer may develop a niche solution and they use this technology provider. Then they develop another niche solution. Then someone comes in and sells in a software suite that does this and this, but not this. Well, the whole key is to be able to get that Orphan software to communicate together in a common way, so that you can then make it actionable and do something with it. Because I think the days of going and just trying to sell your one niche application and this is what it's going to do for you. Well, a customer's looking end to end. They're looking at a whole process unit. They're looking at an entire power gen facility. They're looking at an entire compressor station, not just one piece of the equipment. So yes, you need the smart devices and the intelligent things, but getting all those systems to communicate in a certain way, normalizing the data, and then being able to do something with it, that's what drives the business value in those four areas that Gino touched on.
And if I may build on that, Brandon, I see a question here from Maria Borges, and she talks about, you talk about automating the whole IT and OT. And I think to your point, it's a while ago I came across the term of Orphan software. Before we go anywhere, could you just define what you mean by that? Because some people may not be aware of what Orphan software, what you mean.
Yeah, Gina, you want to take it or you want me to take it?
Sure, no, I can take it. It's Orphan software is really exactly, kind of along the lines of what Brandon was already talking about. And that's really around software applications that you in the past have deployed to do one specific task or one specific thing. But then outside of that, it kicked off a manual process. It wasn't connected to any other systems on the front end or the back end. And that's really where systems are looking to go now. With our Genix platform is one area. What we're doing is we're tying OT and business systems together in such that as you have events happen, you can communicate backwards and forwards within that value chain. And so that's where we're really starting to help customers, because they can't have processes that are now creating a manual event. If they can take that manual event and auto feed it to another application upstream or downstream that adds efficiencies, that's where they're looking to go. Because like you were talking about earlier, Kevin, we can't go back to the way things were. So that's going to require us to make some changes in the way that we run process and the way that we integrate systems as well.
And if I may, Gino, when you say integrate systems, sometimes we kind of hear in the industry, well, I'll just get rid of the old stuff and I'll build something new. Sometimes that's not that feasible, right? So it is what it is. So you need to join the dots. And I think that's one with Maria's question. That's one of the big challenges that's been out there, is there are so many systems, and joining that stuff sounds easy on a PowerPoint, but man, it can be tough.
Oh yeah, and that's 100%, and that's where when we developed, not to turn it into a commercial, when we developed our Genix platform, that's really what it was developed in mind of, is looking at all of these disparate applications and creating an architecture that would enable you to connect all of those systems in a rapid way and then drive business value with doing data correlation, with doing analytics, and then driving outputs that enabled you to move forward.
And that's why we have to be focused not on trying to be out there delivering a platform, but delivering an integration solution, because you know, you got to speak open protocols. You can't have these proprietary offerings. Some customers want data on-prem, some will go into a cloud that they're hosting, some will go into a cloud that we're hosting. So you have to have this flexibility in order to get these systems to work. I mean, you know, we work for a Swiss company, and so we don't have the arrogance that everything is an ABB solution. Customers are going to have third-party solutions out there. It could be PLCs sitting on a skid. It could be different things that are out there, instruments or valves or intelligent systems. And so we have to be able to integrate with those things. And that's what the customer is really looking for, is someone who also sees the world through their lenses of an end-to-end solution. And so that's certainly a big area of focus for us, Kevin.
I remember it's probably a decade or more ago, back when I was at Intel, and we were over the utilities, and someone said to me, "Oh, we use the Goose protocol," and I thought they were just, you know,
yeah.
Here's the new guy. And then I got into oil and gas, and they explained to me some of the protocols in there, and I was like, "Wow."
Yeah.
So if I may, Brandon, given some of the integration, the different technologies, whatever, are there any kind of core technology? But we see people here starting to ask about what is the ABB doing around AI, machine learning? Where are you headed with all that?
So I think, I mean, AI is certainly obviously on high on the radar for everybody whenever you start talking about digitalization. And the fortunate thing for us, the business that Gino and I are part of, we're kind of we're a system integrator within ABB. We have the control, the brains element, and everything that sits in our business. We work with our brothers and sisters that have the hearts and veins, right? So the motors, the businesses that does the motors, the drives, the intelligent switchgear, all these kind of things, and instrumentation, all these sort of things. And so AI is certainly really important, and they're working on all that. So they're building algorithms, they're building machine learning and all this. So they have the application knowledge, pump curves, torque, speeds, optimization of the process. How does all that stuff work in order to deliver the most efficient solution that we can deploy? And so they work on all that. We then bring it into our systems to feed up to the level 3, level 4 layers, so that it can then be actionable across the entire end to end. And so that's what's really important. And that's kind of where we're trying to differentiate ourselves, is that we have our brothers and sisters that have all the application knowledge in the world about how a motor should work, how a drive should work, how a gas analyzer should work. And now we build all that intelligence together, put it in a common infrastructure, and now you can do something with it. And so I think AI is a big deal that all of our businesses are working on. The other core technology that I'd say, Kevin, that's really important is that you're going to see the power gen systems or the electrical systems be much more hybrid solutions as we go forward, versus just say an incoming power line. Now what you may see is a customer has renewables on site. They have battery storage on site. They're also backfeeding the grid at times when they may be ramped down, or they may have something going on. They may backfeed the grid. And so how we do the power management, and we've got some different technologies and solutions around power management, but so that you can account for everything that's happening, so that you can properly ramp up and ramp down assets. All of this really important as we go forward. So I would look at those kind of two areas, the machine learning, the AI elements that we're doing on the product side, ultimately into the application space that we have, and then the energy infrastructure side, I think shouldn't be underestimated as we look forward, because that's very different, the hybrid systems, than it is today.
Yeah.
No, agreed. Folks, thanks for everybody who's joined in. Just for a quick housekeeping, I see some folks are posting in the chat some questions, so I'm keeping an eye on those. But ideally, if you can post them in the question and answer, then we can curate them better. But I suppose there was one question here as well, kind of related to, and Brandon, you mentioned it earlier. the amount of data that's, in some ways, that was always being collected, but we just never did anything with it, or it wasn't. It sat somewhere, and or if it did get sent somewhere, it sat there. Okay, we have AI means many things to many people, and you have AI, and you have machine learning, and all the way down to neural networks and whatever. How do you cope, or how are your customers coping with the amount of data coming at them?
I think that's one of the current challenges. Gino may have more to add here than I do, but I think deciding which data is mission critical for instant versus what are you looking at for longer term trends, analysis, efficiency improvements, et cetera. So what information do you need to go through the control system in order to be able to do something with now versus what information, maybe you're pulling from a historian, or maybe it's all then going into a data lake and you're using doing analysis on it later. So the first thing is deciding what's critical and what's not, because that determines the infrastructure, the speeds, how decisions are made, et cetera. And then it's about normalizing this data, applying an application knowledge to it. So, you can get some false positives and different things. As we've started monitoring our customers' sites, in our marine business, for example, we've been monitoring vessels for years and years and years. And we're talking to those vessels, interacting with those vessels on a very regular basis, looking at wind speeds, water currents, fuel consumption, potential preventative maintenance, all these sort of things to optimize the path or the route that ship is taking. And so we're doing that on the fly right now. And so that's a great way that we're using all this intelligent data. We're pulling out what's relevant, communicating back what's relevant to the captain of the ship, and then adjusting as needed. And that's having a real efficiency gain for the shipping industry. And so it's about what's mission critical. What do we look at for efficiency improvements in these things? And then how do you action it? And so I think the data challenge is very real, Kevin, that our customers are struggling with. Gino, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I think you said it well, and the key point that you hit on that's a challenge for a lot of the customers is around contextualizing the data, right? Putting it in a format that you can understand, that you can then integrate into and use up and downstream in the process, just like Brandon's talking about. And as you look at our platforms, what we're enabling customers to do is contextualize that data so they can begin to move it and do interesting things with it, just like Brandon was saying. So I think you hit it perfect.
The interesting thing, Kevin, is that if we say we're using 20 or 30% of the data that's available, if you could get a 20% efficiency gain, you're still not using that much of the data, but it's still a pretty big efficiency gain. And so, I think you just have to keep it in some perspectives.
No, I agreed. My own personal opinion, having been involved in many utility smart meter projects over the years, it is still fascinating to see the amount of no value that's been extracted from collecting.
That's right.
Whatever.
And
so
I think
much
I
data.
think the application knowledge is really important because that will give you some perspective. If something's acting funny, it may be because of something we know. On a pulp and paper machine, it may be because of the water density or because of different things that are happening. And so having that application knowledge allows you to put some intelligence even on top of the machine learning or AI that you're implementing. And I think that is a really important element because the people side of this, I know we'll touch on it later, Kevin, in a few of the discussion topics, but the people side of this or the culture side of this shouldn't be underestimated because it can defeat technology pretty quickly.
Yeah.
No, I agreed. And if I may, there's a question here from Greg Deerwater. So the solutions that you have today have some level of AI, and then the future ones are going to have more. And I kind of opened up earlier by the pace of change is hard to keep up. How do you communicate to your customers that, look, there's almost a release of something every day. Here's a new bit, another bit. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think that's on us to simplify the interfaces from the OEM perspective. I've made the joke before on some of these discussions that we don't have a lot of R&D people sitting around trying to figure out how to make our devices or our solutions less intelligent. So everything's going to get more and more intelligent and have more and more diagnostic capabilities and intelligence built into it. We have to make that interface easier. because, I think a lot of us are on Apple devices, for example, and so we're used to how that works in our personal life. That it connects, it knows what's going on, it can pull over information, all these sort of things. So I think for us in the integration space and the automation space and what we're doing in our digital solution space, how these solutions interface to one another, keeping it open protocols, making it as automated as possible, that helps our customers adopt it and implement it versus, expecting that they're going to learn it all on their own, because you can't possibly. I mean, you have some places where it's a very mature workforce and accessibility to a lot of infrastructure. There's other places incredibly remote. I mean, we look at what's going on in Mozambique right now, and with Total kind of pulling out of that project or suspending some work on that project, that's a very different work environment. And so you have to be able to scale any of those situations, and we need to use technology as an enabler for that, not an inhibitor.
And the questions are flying in here, folks. So I'm trying to figure out the ones to put them in order rather than we jump all over the place. But I suppose, Gino, you mentioned earlier the whole thing around maintenance and predictive maintenance and. But there was a question here from Parag Dave in terms of how much of the data that's collected today, and this varies from customer to customer and industry to industry, and you cover a lot of things, but just how much of the data that's collected today do you think is used in predictive maintenance today?
Yeah, I think
fraction.
Yeah, sure. No, I think it's a good question, and I think Brandon actually touched on this earlier with 20, referencing 20% of the data is actually used. Yeah, very little of maintenance data is actually used in the preventative maintenance cycle. We're helping customers overcome that. A lot of times it's where we're at is writing models, right? And that's if there's one real advantage that we have, and Brandon was talking about this earlier, is we have a lot of domain expertise, and I'm finding ourselves getting involved in a lot of projects, or failed projects, I should say. It's because customers purchased the technology platform, but they didn't pick someone that was able to bring the models along with it. It's one thing to have a great platform, but it's another thing, you have to build models. And if you don't have the domain expertise to build those models, that's where customers can get a little bit tied up. So with an ABB, we know process, we know equipment, we know electrical, we know the mechanical side. So a lot of times we're coming in and we're helping customers bridge those gaps of where looking at, the technology, looking at the information, and then helping them build the models that are going to enable them to advance forward on that maintenance side and move more into that preventative maintenance, because the missing component is the model. And it may not be just on a motor or process, but it's linking them all together, because you have to, in order to be effective, you have to have the process information correlated with the electrical information, correlated with the mechanical information. And you've got to have a partner that's able to do all of that and write those models for you. And you may have a partner that really understands the process, but doesn't understand electrical all that well, or vice versa, or any of those mixes. But within our capabilities, what we do is we look at the process, we look at all of those components, and then we help the customer write a holistic model that creates better results for them as they look to move forward and manage their business.
I mean, Kevin, we would say that there's at least 30 to 40% efficiency, productivity gains in unused data.
Oh yeah.
And so, a lot of times we step over dollars to get to pennies. I think, and so you would say, hey, if we can get a couple percent productivity gain, that's fantastic. Well, I think there's very significant productivity gains that we can get to just by using the data in a more intelligent way. We're not going to get to 100% usage, right? But if we're sitting at 20 or 30 now, and we could probably argue, and there's studies all over the place, but if you push that up to 35, 40, 45, 50, okay, you can really start having an impact.
No, I agreed. And there's a question in here from Heinrich, and I suppose to build on what Gino mentioned, 'tis years ago when someone was saying to me, look, okay, you're in a factory, you're in a refinery or whatever, we've got 10, 20 motors of this type or whatever. So if they gather all the data and kind of compare it amongst themselves, it might still be a very small sample size. So I'm not really sure what good is or what great is or bad is. Whereas if I aggregate that back with the manufacturer who has 10,000 of these things out there, you'll suddenly figure out what's good and bad very quickly. But this comes to Henrik's point in that, so we talk about IT and OT, and I was on about the cloud, and we see a lot of more data into the cloud, but there's still a lot of hesitancy because people think that, well, all the data is going to go to the cloud. And then what happens if the cloud goes away? But you have SCADA systems. How do you address that it's cloud, it's SCADA? Is it one or the other? Is it a combo? How do you approach that?
You know, it's really, I'll take that one, Brandon. It's really from the perspective of you're touching on a great talking point for the advocacy of multi-tenant cloud environments, because you're exactly right. Your sample size for your particular facility or your particular business may not be large enough to be able to make you know, a real distinct decision. But when you begin to get into multi-tenant environments and companies begin to agree to share, you know, motor performance specific data or different types of data, not proprietary data relative to their process, but equipment type data, that's when it becomes very powerful, because then you're able to see that a certain motor has a systemic problem, or a specific brand of PLC has a systemic problem. So as you move into, and I know the industry struggles a little bit with multi-tenant cloud environments, but I think for the exact point that's being mentioned here, the more customers get comfortable with it, I believe the benefits for the industry as a whole will be significant.
And I think it goes. It's not necessarily a digital statement, Kevin, but we have a lot of customers that say, "Hey, we don't want a one-off solution."
Yeah.
Right. We want what you're deploying other places because we want to learn from what's happening with other customers and in other market spaces. We want to have the parallels between your marine business and your mining business, and doing that for us in oil and gas or in chem and refining or whatever it is. And so I think it is important that we learn a way to share, again, not the critical process data that a chemical customer would say is a unique or competitive advantage for them, but you know how a 5 megawatt motor is running in these kind of applications probably does have comparability to another 5 megawatt motor running in a similar application. And we know that information better than anybody. And so we've got software suites and things in our motor business that, again, is focused on their product, their domain knowledge. And I think that's what Gino's alluding to.
Alrighty. And there's a question here as well, kind of related to all this, from Art Lazar. You know, with your typical customer, and again, what's a typical customer, but from your experience, we talk a lot about that, okay, all this digitalization will help you be more efficient and save costs and whatever, but how do you tie that back now to today's world of sustainability, where sustainability today means a lot more than it did 10 years ago?
Yeah, no, I mean, sustainability is critical now from whether it's a regulatory perspective, a political perspective, and investor related. So with ESG and the importance that plays as we look at how capital will be available. And then, you know, now more than ever, the court of public opinion might be the strongest of any of the factors that are influencing our decisions. Now, I heard a customer on a panel previously say that you can't be a sustainably green company with a red bottom line. And that has stuck with me since I heard that. And I told him I would steal it and that I would reuse it. So I just want to make sure he gets credit for it, that it's not my statement. But I think that's where technology helps drive towards sustainability. We've got customers now that are coming to us saying, hey, the only thing that matters on this project is that our carbon index score is as low as possible. That's what matters for our project, that it's as robust of a design facility from a energy efficiency standpoint, carbon intensity standpoint. All of these help us deploy the right technology to make that happen. Well, you can't do that without integrating all of these digital technologies because otherwise you're going to be building it as you did 10 years ago. And that's not good enough. And so I think there is no separation between technology, digital, and sustainability. I think they're hand in hand integrated for us to be able to make these systems as efficient as possible. And as Gino said, if you the more output you can get from a unit of power, the reduced CO2 that you can get from a unit of power, the more economical your plant is, the greener your business is, and then you go. And so I think these go absolutely hand in hand, Kevin. So I think I saw one of the questions about how do you kind of convince the industry's conservative historically, and how do you convince them to move forward? The good news is I don't think it's only on us to convince them. I think their own shareholders are pushing it. Their boards are pushing it. The countries, the communities they serve are pushing it. So it's not optional. I think it's a license to operate is the sustainability element. And if you do not respect that license to operate, it will be taken from you.
There's I'm looking at the questions, as I said, are flying in. There's a good few around cybersecurity. So let's hold that topic and we'll come back to it in a second. But I suppose, Gino, and again, quite a few of the questions are around AI and how the business value and how do you improve sustainability. There's quite a few questions coming in around, let's say, specific features that are, let's say, issues that were in the press recently, the Texas thing with lack of data and the power outage and whatever.
Yeah.
And I know when we were chatting earlier in the week, just kind of setting this up, you also mentioned the point that energy companies today can sit in isolation because the entire energy value chain, or whatever you want to call it, is all starting to get linked. So whether I'm a generator or a renewables, or I'm oil and gas, or I'm a pipeline or a petrol station, everything's tied together. So how does that make it easier to join the dots?
Yeah. So I think, what's important as you link smart equipment to autonomous enabled software, and autonomous enabled software is then connected to, the value chain up and downstream. I think what's important as you realize those new efficiency gains, I think it's very important that you begin to model for the outlier event. Because if you don't model for that outlier event will eventually happen. And I think that's what we saw here in Texas, in that no one anticipated, this freeze event happening. And maybe it was anticipated, but they didn't model for it. And I think as you model for it and you understand what that outlier event is, you have to ask yourself, how are you going to respond? How are you going to keep your business on track? How are you going to keep your customers in a good place? And as you begin to ask yourself those questions, then you are going to enable yourself to be prepared and be ready. But I think that's what's critical is companies get these new efficiencies gains. They've got to model for the outlier event, because that's critical.
Kevin, you brought up a great point about the interdependencies of these solutions. Now, you look at carbon capture, for example. Carbon capture has been around for a while, still working through what the economics of that are and how do you do it. But one thing we know for sure is that it's only scalable if you use more, capture more of the carbon than is just generated at your own facility. And so now you're looking at industrial complexes where a company or a set of companies are going to come in and they're going to go after carbon capture together. And so now how do those systems communicate? You've got to go across fence lines. You've got to know how much each one's contributing. If there's carbon tax credits, and we don't know where that goes globally, but how do you account for it from a regulatory standpoint? We've got investors now. I saw on one of the LNG projects where a major offtake, someone who had agreed to the offtake backed out of the project, and they're now looking from wellhead to flange of what's the CO2 footprint. Well, imagine what it takes to account for that, and how many systems have to talk to one another, and what that ecosystem has to look like in order for that to work. You can only get to that level of sustainability through digital technologies, through automation and through intelligence of how this ecosystem is communicating. And so I think that interdependency point that you touched on, or if it came from one of the questions, really, really important, because it's no longer going to be an islanded facility where everything's inside your own fence. There's going to be interdependencies outside of there.
No, agreed. And another question that just popped in, and I'm just finding it here to get the person from Golapa Krishna Bala. Excuse me for pronouncing that poorly. The question is around, where does digital twins fit into all this as a technology? And if I may, I know you had an announcement today with Equinor on some pretty cool stuff, and digital twins featured in that. So what are you up to?
From a digital twin perspective, it's going to become more and more relevant. In fact, we were just having this conversation yesterday, Brandon and I were, and as we look at digital twin, there's one thing to run the analytics in that and what an analytic output could be, but you've got to model it against what, you have a current process in the way you're running today. And as you begin to model, you can run that in a simulation in the digital twin and get an understanding of what the outcome is going to be. Is it going to be the outcome that you're expecting? And then also you can begin to model, okay, now that you have a new outcome, now we were talking about the value chain earlier, how's that going to affect the value chain? Because the value chain may or may not be expecting this new efficiency gain. So what role does that play? So digital twin in links to artificial intelligence is going to become very, very significant as we move forward. And so we absolutely see a tighter and tighter linkage happening there.
And that announcement that you mentioned is an exciting one for us, where we combine adaptive execution, which is something that we released in October, but that's digitally enabled. So technology, people, process, technology, and infrastructure in order to deploy end-to-end solutions. And we're using it on that project. That's a completely unmanned facility offshore for a processing facility, as well as wellheads and a subsea distribution element, and no helipad, no anything, completely remote of how that solution is manned. And so, think about that as a path of where technology is going. Certainly, we always talk about the journey towards autonomous, and that journey has a lot of steps in order to get there. But we firmly believe that more and more things will go towards moving towards autonomy.
No, and folks, for everybody out there, if you look for ABB and Equinor on Google it or on social media, you'll see the announcement in terms of a fully unmanned processing platform. In terms of sustainability, the power for that facility off the coast of Norway is coming from the onshore grid from hydropower. Now, it may not be everybody's idea of the ultimate answer to sustainability, but as you say, it's step by step by step, right? Rather than diesel generators on site and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, the reduced CO2 footprint, you don't have people flying out there on helicopters in bad weather. So there's a human element to it, a different workforce. I mean, think about the workforce now of the millennial generation and others that are coming into our workforce. They're not the same as the ones that would go and spend maybe 30 days off site on a platform or on a rig or in the middle of a very remote area. And so how do we make sure that we attract the right talent? I mean, all this goes into sustainability. When we talk sustainability, Kevin, we like to talk about CO2 footprint, but there's also the people side of it. There's diversity and inclusion, which is a big topic now in sustainability. There's HSE, which is a big topic in sustainability. There's integrity and compliance, which is the big topic. All of these integrate together with technology. And for us to attract the right talent, I mean, we want to make our industry the place that people want to work. And I think that's part of our charter at ABB, and certainly with Lucian and with what you're doing, Kevin, and our listeners. Absolutely, electric vehicles is a really important part of where things are going. And the IT companies certainly play a great role, but we provide power and water for societies to advance. I don't think you can have a more important mission. And so, getting the right talent in the door helps us be a sustainable business. And so I think it is important that we love technology, and we've got engineers and we'll design things until the end of time. But we're also in the people business. And so I think making sure that we get that point across in our short time with you guys here today, important to me, the people element.
No, I fully agree. And, my own personal opinion, when someone says to me about sustainability, my kind of reference point is the UN 17 sustainability goals. Mm-hmm. And as a technology geek, there's probably 3 of them where it's like hardcore, energy efficiency, industrial automation, blah. So it's like you can say that's hardcore technology. Now, technology plays into every other piece, but if you look at diversity, fair wage, every one of the 17, that's sustainability today. So it's not just somebody made a comment earlier, and I apologize, I'm still looking through the thing. Oh, well, what happens when we add all the IoT and all the computers? Aren't we increasing the amount of power? And I'll let you answer, but my own personal opinion is that, well, if you add more IoT and sensors, yeah, they'll take more power. But if you can stop motor, typically motors today are on or off.
Yeah.
Sure.
So if you can start turning them on when you need them only, then
Yep.
the amount of efficient, there's something like 60, 70% of power in many factories is just motors running 24/7 that don't need to be
Yeah, I
running.
mean, 45% of the world's energy, I think, is consumed by electric motors. And so, okay, what can you do to make that more efficient? And that's part of the mission that we're on. So I think it's a balance there. Of course, you are using more power. You read that now. I'm not an expert by any stretch, so I'm glad the topic of this call isn't about cyber currency. But when you look at the mining of cyber currency, you read about the load. And when you look at, we have a big business in data centers. And data centers is obviously, it's a small power plant, essentially. But you can offset that. You can way more than offset that by what we're doing with renewables, with hydro, with hydrogen, which will come in as part of the energy transition. And you can get green hydrogen from renewables. And then how do you use that? So I think it's certainly an important consideration, but we can more than offset that with technology and with these efficiency gains that we've been talking about.
So there's quite a few questions coming in here. Some are very specific. There's a couple of more great ones that are we'll probably have to take offline about digital twins and Sahara. There's very knowledgeable folks on here, and they're asking some great questions. We'll probably follow up with some of those offline, folks. I'm conscious of the time. We've got about 8 minutes left, and I do want a bunch of different people have asked about, okay, so we add more digitalization solutions, IoT, IT, OT, cybersecurity. And we could go on for the next probably 24 hours talking about cybersecurity, but how do you address concerns from people saying, but the more computers and the more stuff you put out there, the bad guys will find a way in?
Sure. I think when we look at cyber, I think it's really around doing the best you can with current technologies, the current standards that are out there. Because as we look at implementation of different cybersecurity standards and technologies, it's about visualization, getting an understanding of what's happening across your network, getting an understanding what's happening at the system level, get an understanding of what's coming in and how that's affecting workloads, et cetera. And so it's looking for patterns. It's having a way to be connected to all of the different systems, because everyone is, all of the different manufacturers are constantly pushing updates. How are you keeping track of those updates? When you see an event, how are you handling in that event? Do you have a workflow process that enables you to be efficient in the way you respond? Do you know which events you need to respond to, in what order, and which ones are the most important that you need to get after right away? And as we look at cyber and look at the services that we offer, because it's very much for us not only a software play, but a services driven play. It's looking at the OT environment. It's understanding what's happening in the customer's OT space. It's looking at all the different applications, all the different firmware, all the different software providers and the hardware providers, and understanding what's happening to those pieces of equipment. And as an event happens, being able to understand what, as you started off this conversation, what is critical and what can possibly wait till later, and addressing the ones that are critical, the most rapid in a workflow that aligns with the criticality of the event.
Yeah, cybersecurity is it's a fact of life, and I know we get sometimes personally I see some folks sometimes we mix it up in terms of you can do something that's stupid and somebody will find the back door, default password, and that's unfortunate. You can also have some of the best cybersecurity people, technologies, whatever, and if some really, really clever state actor goes after you, that's hard. And yet I've seen many companies spend so much money, and unfortunately it's human error. Somebody puts a password on a post-it or tells someone that this is the password, or an employee internally that kind of is a bit disgruntled and stuff. And that doesn't make it right, but it's complex, right? And technology is not the solution, and it's not the only problem either.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is where you get into the people side, you get into the process or the culture side. And so, certainly there's this interdependencies between all these disparate systems, and then what's looking over those to make sure that we've got a secure environment. But then there's also the process side and the rigidity or the compliance to following those processes. And so, yeah, again, the people culture side, I think, plays a pretty important part in the cybersecurity element or arena as well.
Yeah, because you're going to have an event. It's just a matter of time. And then it's, do you have the people and the processes in place to respond? Because none of us are, as we've seen here recently, none of us are immune.
Yeah.
No, I agreed. Okay, we're coming up at the last couple of minutes, and I'm just looking at the questions. We've answered about 8. I think there's about another 25 open. So
Yeah.
we're going to be busy after this. There's probably another 7 or 8 we've kind of glanced over on the cybersecurity, the IoT, and whatever. Obviously, you know, Brandon, when you started out, you mentioned that you guys at Energy Industries, you cover quite a few verticals right across. Folks can go to abb.com and start navigating from there. And as you know, Gino, you made the point, and also Brandon, that while you might have specific solutions for a particular industry, a lot of the plumbing underneath comes from core components from across ABB.
Exactly.
And I suppose before we hand back to Lucien, Gino, if people are heading away from this, if there's one takeaway, what would you give them?
Sure. I think the one thing I'd like them to take away from this conversation is that, you know, we understand here at ABB that customers are, you know, all of them are moving across this autonomous journey or this digital business journey at a different pace and are at a different place. And so I think what we're really good at is sitting down and understanding with the customer where they're at today and where it is they want to go in the future, based on value that it returns to their shareholders. I think that, you know, a lot of times we hear from customers where we met with, you know, a competitor or someone else, and they're recommending a rip and replace. We're really looking at how do we take advantage of what it is investments have been made, adding technology from EN to bridge gaps, then look at, you know, things like adaptive execution around managing the risk of a project and then moving quickly through that project so it can deliver value to its shareholders. I think that would be the one thing I'd like to, you know, leave the audience with, is that we can help and we can advise wherever you're at, and we're not going to recommend rip and replace.
Mine, Kevin, I think it's a great question and a great way to end. Mine would be that sustainability and technology are integrated hand in hand. And I think you can't have one without the other. So it's a journey that we're on together. I don't know that we ever reach the destination, but I think it's a journey that we're on together. And so technology, sustainability, and when I say technology, certainly the digitalization aspect, you know, if we do it right, we do it transparent, we focus on business outcomes, we can have an impact on our industry that leaves a bigger mark for the future. And so I'm absolutely bullish on what we can do for our industries.
That's a great point, Brandon and Gino. And, you know, my own personal view is that it's like technology, innovation, human nature. There's clever people out there will always come up with something new. Sure. And we call it an energy transition. And we talk about being sustainable. And to me, yeah, I don't think we'll ever get to the end, because once we get to a certain point, we'll find something else to be more efficient on, or transition to, or whatever. So,
yeah.
Lucien, back to you.
Thank you, Kevin, Gino, Brandon. What an inspiring session. It's no wonder we had so many questions, and my commitment to the folks in the audience is to follow, exactly, to do something, take it offline, do a blog on this. So appreciate everybody's time with us. And if you like the topic of energy transition, join us on August 12th, IoT World's Energy Day. We also have things on sustainability that Brandon and Gino touched on June 16 on the IoT World Smart Cities Days. And of course, if you like to get more on the technology, the reference, there is next month on May 12 on IIoT that we have. Special thanks to ABB for this educational session, to our prominent guests, Brandon, Gino, Kevin. And this concludes the program for today. Thank you all.
Thank you guys very much. Great to be here. Appreciate it.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you, everyone.
Stay safe.